Welcome to the Rochester, New Hampshire History Podcast, a monthly show that will shine a light on a piece of history that has been all but forgotten.
Horse racing, thrilling rides, food vendors, baking contests, and livestock shows were always associated with the old Rochester Fair. Did you know, in the 1890s, a new attraction was added to the Rochester Fair? It was the hot air balloon, and it quickly became a favorite of fairgoers. Back then, the operator of a hot air balloon was called an aeronaut. He would attach a parachute to himself and hold on to ropes that were attached to the balloon as it rose into the air. When the balloon reached an altitude where he could safely parachute back to the fairgrounds, he would let go of the ropes and plummet to the earth. After deploying his parachute, he would float to the ground. However, the balloon would then be unmanned and slowly deflating. In a perfect world, the balloon would gently land in a field or another isolated area. What could possibly go wrong with a large balloon made out of heavy rubber descending out of control? To answer that question, we have to go back to the 1909 Rochester Fair, when an unmanned, deflating balloon almost killed a woman driving a horse-drawn carriage on Walnut Street.
The September 24, 1909 Rochester Courier reported the following story. As Mrs. Jack Canny of Meterborough Corner was returning from the Rochester Fair last Wednesday, a collapsed balloon, which had been sent up in the afternoon, descended and landed directly upon her carriage. She was extricated and carried into the house of David Tufts at 55 Walnut Street, where Dr. Walter Roberts was at once summoned. Mrs. Canny was nearly asphyxiated, black in the face and unconscious when she was rescued. In addition to the dangers of a deflated balloon smothering innocent bystanders, the actual act of jumping out of a balloon could be dangerous. In 1899, the following serious accident occurred at the Rochester Fair, involving a Vermont man crashing to the ground. A local newspaper reported the following. Clarence Burnett, noted aeronaut, descended in a balloon, but a tear developed in it. Hot air was escaping from the balloon and would not stay aloft. He jumped from his balloon, and his parachute failed to open, and he struck the ground hard. He fell a distance of about 100 feet, landed on his feet, but struck a wooden post. He received severe spinal injuries and bruises. In 1927, a fatal accident was reported in the September 16th Rochester Courier. A man who had parachuted at the Rochester Fair earlier in the year had died at the Rutland Fair when his parachute failed to open, and he fell onto a barn.
For over 30 years, hot air balloons and parachutes dominated the skies at the fair. In the 1930s, the popularity of balloons was challenged by the appearance of another flying machine. There were now airplanes performing at the fair, and hot air balloons seemed boring compared to the fast-flying airplanes. In 1931, to make hot air balloons more exciting, a cannon was added to the act. A balloon would carry a cannon aloft, and once the balloon got over 2,000 feet in altitude, the cannon would be fired shooting a person into the sky. The human missile would then deploy his parachute and float safely to the ground. Surprisingly, there were no reported mishaps from this crazy act. Even with the addition of the human cannonball, the crowds lost interest in balloons, as they seemed quaint compared to the stunts that airplanes performed. By the late 1930s, the balloons and their brave aeronauts stopped visiting the Rochester Fair.
Before we end the show, we have to mention Charles Dame of Rochester. He took his first parachute jump from a balloon at the 1927 Rochester Fair. The Rochester Courier reported on this with the headline, "Local Boy Makes Parachute Drop." From then on, he became a pioneer in the art of parachuting. Charles performed all over the country and was among the few that performed a triple parachute jump from a balloon. This dangerous stunt used 3 different parachutes in the same jump. When he was older and his days of parachuting were over, Charles became a master parachute rigger, which meant he was qualified to pack, fold, prepare parachutes after they have been used. In a newspaper article, Charles said the following about skydiving. "There's nothing terrifying about jumping. In fact, it's a pleasant feeling. You seem to be floating, standing still when you're doing 125 miles per hour. That's also dangerous for beginners who might not realize how fast they are moving and how little time they have to activate their chutes. There's nothing terrifying because they don't realize they are in danger."
This ends the podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please email bobgriffinpodcast@gmail.com and come back next month for another episode of Rochester, New Hampshire History.